I'll say it again, I'm absolutely thrilled that Roy Moore lost the Alabama Senate race, because I would have voted for anyone besides Roy Moore. I literally would have voted for a turd over Roy Moore. But with that being said, just because Roy Moore was such a monster doesn't mean that his opponent who won, Doug Jones, is a gem. Because more and more, with everything I hear about Doug Jones, I get more disappointed in him. Because you think that as someone with a unique opportunity to represent people from Alabama and show them what a true progressive can do for them, he's really showing that he's going to get in there and basically keep that seat warm for a Republican in a couple of years. So, I mean, there's really nothing to be excited about when it comes to Doug Jones. The one thing that is exciting about Doug Jones is that he's not Roy Moore. And in an interview with Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe, I think that Doug Jones proved this point yet again, that he really stands for nothing. And watch what he says here, because Joe Scarborough is going to tell him that he's probably going to be pulled in different directions when he gets into Congress, and he even talks about how donors might try to influence Doug Jones. Now, watch what Doug Jones has to say about that.
Now, you're going to be pulled, obviously, by a lot of people in Washington, D.C., a lot of people who contributed to you, helped you get elected.
Right.
You're going to be pulled about as far left as possible. I know you are who you are. But as you go around to town hall meetings, how much are you going to listen to the people of Alabama and make sure that you're not in lockstep with them, but that you actually are a United States senator that represents the values of the people of Alabama?
Well, I think that that's critical. I've made a promise during the campaign. I said it yesterday after I was sworn in, that I think a role of the senator is as much of two roles. You've got to listen and learn from your constituents.
Now, that last part about listening and learning is totally agreeable, but what I do take issue with is the first part of that interview, where Joe Scarborough says, you're going to be pulled, obviously, by a lot of people in Washington, D.C., a lot of people who contributed to your campaign, and Doug Jones replies by saying,
right, people who contributed to you, helped you get elected.
Right.
That, to me, is pretty telling, because as soon as he said you're going to be pulled in a lot of different ways, specifically by people who donated to your campaign, that's when Doug Jones decided to chime in and say, yes, I agree. So, in other words, he's acknowledging that donors influence him. And if your donors influence you, then your constituents, their voices are going to be drowned out. Now, is it the case that he could have certainly just said yes in order to be agreeable during the conversation with Joe Scarborough, even if he doesn't necessarily agree with it? Sure, it's possible. Is it the case that Joe Scarborough was specifically referring to Doug Jones's smaller contributors, the grassroots donations? Sure, but when we're watching cable news shows and they refer to donors, 9.9 times out of 10, they're referring to the big boys, the multi-billion-dollar corporations that donate to these politicians. Now, without taking too many conclusions away from Doug Jones's quick response here, it could be benign, but it does give us reason to pause and suspect whether or not he will be listening to his big dollar donors. But in this next clip, Joe Scarborough asked him where he would be willing to work with Republicans on. Now, I don't know why you would ask that. Ask him where he'd be willing to work with Democrats on, or what his policy goals are, but Joe Scarborough asked the question nonetheless. And he didn't answer, because that would make him look bad. He already has a lot of progressives pissed off at him, and I mean, this happened. I mean, we've been really disenfranchised by him before he even won, because he's just a boring candidate that really offers nothing. But watch what he says there, because he instead tries to prove that he is liberal in some ways, but I wasn't too intrigued by what he had to say.
Can you name a major issue where you think you're going to be able to work with Richard Shelby and other Republicans in the Senate to do something that may not be popular with your Democratic base, may not be popular with Democrats in Washington, but will be more popular with people back in your home state?
I don't know if there's one specific issue that stands out right now. Washington's kind of almost what's the issue du jour? Every day there's something that new that pops up. I want to get involved in the CHIP program and try to see if we can get that funded. It means a lot to 150,000 kids in Alabama. I know there's going to be infrastructure bills that come up over the spring and the summer to try to work with. The one thing about Senator Shelby, I've known him for so long, ever since he was a state senator in Tuscaloosa, and I was at the University of Alabama. So we're going to work well together and try to do the things for the state, whether it's on the budget and trying to bring the military money into Alabama like we've had such a success at in the last few years. I think there's a number of things, but as we sit here today and we're going forward, we're just going to have to see what pops up, because every day is new around here. Every week is new.
Yeah, we're going to have to agree to disagree, because the same issues that affected us yesterday still affect us today, and I can guarantee you that they're going to also affect us tomorrow as well. So it's not just that a new issue pops up every day. I mean, we've been talking about things that we need for decades now. Medicare for all. For years now, we've been talking about how we need a $15 minimum wage. We've needed criminal justice reform in this country since forever. So to suggest that new issues come up every day in Congress and you kind of just got to go with the flow, that's pretty worrying to me. That's troubling, because that shows that Doug Jones has no real agenda. He's going into the Senate with no real goals. Now, since he's being criticized by progressives, he doesn't want to make it seem as if he's going to go full Republican as soon as he gets to the Senate. I mean, certainly we all expect him to work with Republicans. He stated that he's going to work with Republicans, but I think this interview, was him trying to extend an olive branch to progressives. And he said that, if he wants to work with Republicans on something, it's not going to be reforming social safety net programs, because we all know what they want to do. They want to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. He said, well, I'd like to work with them on something like CHIP. And that's it. Now, CHIP is great. I love that he said that. I certainly hope that Democrats and Republicans will work together to pass CHIP. But CHIP, in general, is a no-brainer. Supporting CHIP doesn't make you liberal, it doesn't make you conservative, it just makes you a reasonable person. It's such a common sense policy idea that the default position for all politicians should be that they support CHIP. And until they tell us otherwise, we should expect them to always renew CHIP when it comes up. But what he's telling us here, in not so many words, is that he's not really going to get into the Senate and fearlessly argue in favor of policy ideas that would benefit his constituents. He's going to get in there and only support policy ideas that marginally improve the lives of people in the United States and Alabama. In other words, he's not going to do anything. Now, I already know what you guys are going to say in the comment section. Mike, you are being way too harsh on him. I mean, give him at least a couple of months. Give this guy a chance before you criticize him. And yes, it does seem like I'm being overly nitpicky. I'm aware that I may come off that way, with this video. But the problem is that if we don't keep constant pressure on Democrats, we're never going to get anything from them. We're not going to get a single policy concession unless we are relentless and we yell at them every single day, because that's how this party is. Doug Jones is most likely going to get there and be nothing more than a spineless Democrat that doesn't push for anything, that we have to basically drag his feet to get him to support any policy that's even marginally progressive. We shouldn't have to do that. If you're a Democrat, then you should just support policies that benefit the working class. But the fact that we even have to be this nitpicky on Democratic politicians, that should say less about me and more about the state of politics. Because yes, I understand that I'm very nitpicky and my standards are very high, but if we don't keep the pressure on these politicians constantly, understand that you are guaranteeing yourself nothing in return. So anyone in Alabama who voted for Doug Jones, if you don't call his office every single day and demand policy concessions from him and demand that he supports Medicare for all, then you're not going to get it. So yes, I totally get that I seem like an asshole right now, and I'm just looking for everything to gripe about with regard to Doug Jones. But the problem is that in the state of politics today, where big money rules everything, I'm hypersensitive to everything these politicians say, and we have to speak truth to power. If you are a senator, you have a unique opportunity to push for policies that would not only change people's lives, but save the lives of Americans and save lives around the world as well. So you have a tremendous, unfathomable amount of responsibility as a United States Senator. And Doug Jones has given us every indication that he's going to bungle this unique and huge opportunity that he has. And it's frustrating. So I get why people may think that I'm coming off as someone who's just too nitpicky, who isn't even giving him a chance, but I hope that Doug Jones proves me wrong. I will be excited to come out and say, look, I stand corrected. He ended up being progressive. And I'll give him credit where credit is due. But unfortunately, there's a lot of red flags when it comes to Doug Jones. And simply not being Roy Moore is not enough. You're elected. Now represent your constituents.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.